5 years ago, my husband Jamal died, leaving me with a shattered heart, and according to his mother, a massive gambling debt that would cost me everything. For 60 months, I have dutifully sent my mother-in-law Bernice $400 every single month. That is $24,000 of my hard-earned money paid out of guilt and fear, just to keep the so-called loan sharks away from her door. I thought I was honoring my husband's memory by protecting his mother. I ate instant noodles and worked double shifts while I believed she was struggling to survive. But yesterday, my neighbor stopped me in the driveway and changed my entire reality with just 5 words. "Stop sending money. Check this." She handed me a silver flash drive, and what I saw on it made me want to burn the entire world down. Before I reveal the shocking footage that exposed a 5-year lie, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever discovered that the people you trusted most were actually the ones holding the knife behind your back. My name is Keisha, and at 34 years old, I look in the mirror and see a woman aged by exhaustion. I work as a nurse practitioner in Chicago, and the shift I had just finished was brutal even by my standards. 12 hours on my feet dealing with trauma patients and severe understaffing, leaving my scrubs feeling heavy with sweat and despair. It was 7 in the morning, and the gray sky matched my mood perfectly as I pulled my 10-year-old Honda Civic into the driveway of my apartment complex. All I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep before I had to pick up an extra shift just to make ends meet. My bank account notification pinged on my dashboard. Direct deposit received. Immediately, my stomach tightened. I knew exactly where a chunk of that money had to go. It was the 15th of the month, the day Bernice expected her payment. If I was even an hour late, she would call me crying, saying men were banging on her door, threatening to burn her house down. I turned off the ignition and grabbed my bag, but before I could open the door, a shadow fell over my window. It was Mrs. Johnson from apartment 4B. Mrs. Johnson is 70 years old, has lived in this building since the 90s, and misses absolutely nothing. Usually she just waves from her porch, but today she was standing right next to my driver's side door with a look on her face that I had never seen before. It was a mix of pity and fury. I rolled down the window trying to muster a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. I am sorry I do not have time to chat today. I am dead on my feet." She did not smile back. She did not ask about my shift. She reached into the pocket of her floral housecoat and pulled out a small silver USB drive. "Keisha, baby. Listen to me carefully. I know today is payday. Do not send that money to Bernice." I frowned, confused and defensive. "Mrs. Johnson, how do you know about that? And I have to send it. You know about the debt Jamal left. I cannot let anything happen to his mama." Mrs. Johnson let out a sharp, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "There is no debt, baby, and there are no dangerous men coming to her house. The only thing coming to her house is a delivery truck with expensive champagne and designer bags." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" She pressed the cold metal drive into my palm and closed my fingers around it tightly. "I went over there yesterday to drop off a casserole because she told everyone at church she was sick. She was not sick, Keisha. She was in the backyard celebrating. I recorded it all through the fence. Go upstairs, plug this in. Then tell me if you still think that woman is a victim." Mrs. Johnson turned and walked back to her porch without another word, leaving me sitting in the silence of my car. I looked down at the silver device in my hand. It felt heavy like a weapon. My phone buzzed again. A text from Bernice popped up on the screen. "Please hurry with the transfer, honey, they are calling me again." I looked at the text, then at the USB drive. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I knew that the moment I plugged this into my laptop, the version of the past 5 years I had lived in was going to shatter forever. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and walked upstairs to face the truth. I unlocked my apartment door with trembling hands, but before I could step inside, my phone started vibrating violently against my palm. The screen flashed the name Bernice. My stomach dropped to the floor. Part of me wanted to ignore it, Part of me wanted to plug in Mrs. Johnson's drive and see the truth first, but the fear was too deep. The fear ingrained in me for 5 years that my silence would get an old woman hurt. I slid the answer button and brought the phone to my ear. "Keisha, are you there?" Her voice was weak and breathless. "They are outside again, baby. I can hear them pacing on the porch. They said if I do not have the money by noon, they are going to throw a brick through the window." Then came the cough. A wet, rattling sound that used to make me panic, but today, holding that cold USB drive in my other hand, it just sounded loud. Too loud. "I am scared, Keisha. I am so scared. Please tell me you have it." I leaned against my closed door, sliding down until I hit the floor. My apartment was dark and messy piles of laundry. I was too tired to fold, sitting on the couch. I looked at the instant ramen noodles on the counter. That was my dinner. Again. "I am sending it now, Bernice," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I just got paid 10 minutes ago." "Thank you, baby." Bernice sniffled loudly. "Jamal is smiling down on you." Down. "He knows you are taking care of his mama. He would be so disappointed if his mistakes made me homeless. You are the only good thing he left behind." That line hit me like a physical blow. It always did. She knew exactly which knife to twist. She used my dead husband's memory as a weapon to open my wallet. I pulled the phone away from my ear and switched to my banking app. My Face ID unlocked the screen, and the numbers stared back at me. $412.50. That was it. That was everything I had until my next check in 2 weeks. That was my grocery money. That was my gas money. That was the lunch I skipped today because I was saving every penny for this moment. I typed in 400. The recipient name popped up automatically. Bernice Williams. My thumb hovered over the confirm button. For a second I hesitated. Mrs. Johnson's voice echoed in my head. "Stop sending money." But then Bernice coughed again on the other end of the line, a desperate hacking sound that tore at my conscience. I could not risk it. What if Mrs. Johnson was wrong? What if men really were outside her door with gasoline? I closed my eyes and pressed send. The screen processed for a second that felt like an eternity. Then the green checkmark appeared. Transaction successful. $400 sent. My remaining balance was $12.50. I did it, Mama Bernice. It is sent. Bless you, child. The weakness in her voice instantly vanished, replaced by a brisk tone. "I have to go now. I need to get this to them before they get angry." She hung up without saying goodbye. She never said goodbye once the money was gone. I sat there on the floor for a moment, staring at the black screen of my phone. The silence in the apartment was deafening. My stomach growled, reminding me of the hunger I had ignored to pay a debt that might not even exist. I stood up, my legs heavy, and walked over to my kitchen table where my laptop sat closed. I opened it, and the screen glowed blue in the dim room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I held the silver USB drive in my hand. It felt cold, heavier than it looked. I had just paid $400 for a lie. Now it was time to see what I had actually bought. With a surge of adrenaline, I jammed the drive into the USB port. A folder popped up on the screen titled "The Truth." I clicked on the first video file. The folder opened to reveal a single video file dated yesterday afternoon. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a second, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked play. The grainy footage filled the screen. It was clearly shot through the slats of a wooden fence, but the image was sharp enough to break my heart. There was no gang of angry loan sharks. There was no desperate old woman hiding behind locked doors. Instead, I saw Bernice's backyard transformed into a resort. The overgrown weeds I had offered to pull last month were gone, replaced by fresh sod and expensive landscaping, and there, right in the center of the patio, sat a massive steaming jacuzzi that must have cost at least $5,000. But it was the people in the water that made me gasp. My sister-in-law, Tiana, was lounging against the jets holding a crystal flute filled with golden liquid. She was wearing a designer bikini that looked brand new, laughing with her head thrown back. Next to her sat Kyle, her husband. The man who claimed he could not find work for 3 years because of a bad back was currently balancing a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne on the edge of the tub. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath hitching in my throat. I turned up the volume. The audio was slightly muffled by the wind, but their voices cut through the speakers loud and clear. "This is the life, baby," Tiana sighed, taking a sip of the expensive champagne. "I cannot believe Mom was worried about paying for the landscaping." Kyle laughed, a deep, arrogant sound that made my skin crawl. "Why would she worry? We have got the golden goose on speed dial." I watched as Bernice walked into the frame. She was not frail. She was not sick. She was wearing a silk robe and carrying a tray of shrimp cocktail. She set it down on the edge of the jacuzzi and dipped her hand into the water, testing the temperature. "Is the heat working okay?" she asked, her voice strong and steady, completely different from the wheezing invalid I had just spoken to on the phone. "It is perfect, Mama," Tiana chirped. "You really outdid yourself." Bernice smiled, a smug, satisfied grin. "Well, I had to do something with the extra cash. Keisha sent her payment early last month, so I had a little wiggle room." I felt tears prick my eyes, hot and angry. I had eaten peanut butter toast for a week, so she could have wiggle room. Kyle reached out and grabbed a shrimp, popping it into his mouth. "You know what is funny," he said, chewing with his mouth open. "I almost feel bad for her. She is driving that beat-up Honda, working double shifts while we are sitting here drinking $200 champagne." Tiana splashed him playfully. "Don't feel bad. She likes being the martyr. It makes her feel close to Jamal. God rest his soul, but he sure knew how to pick a gullible woman." Then came the line that shattered whatever love I had left for this family. Kyle raised his glass in a mock toast to the camera he did not know was there. To Keisha, he announced with a cruel smirk, "My brother-in-law's widow, the best ATM machine in the world." The video ended, freezing on Kyle's laughing face. I sat in the dark silence of my apartment, staring at the screen. My hands were no longer shaking. A cold, deadly calm washed over me. I looked at the transaction on my phone. $400. It was the last donation they would ever receive. I slammed the laptop shut and stood up. I did not want to cry anymore. I wanted receipts. The screen went black, but the image of Kyle's smirking face was burned into my retinas. For a moment, I could not breathe. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my lungs until they popped. I sat there in the dim blue light of my kitchen, and suddenly the last 5 years flashed before my eyes, not as a tragedy, but as a farce. I looked down at my feet, still encased in the cheap nursing shoes I had glued together 3 times, because I could not justify spending $60 on a new pair. I remembered walking to the bus stop in the freezing Chicago winter because my car needed a new alternator, and I had sent that repair money to Bernice instead. I remembered the Christmas I spent alone eating a tuna sandwich because I had picked up a double shift to pay off the interest on the debt. I had convinced myself it was noble. I told myself I was a good wife honoring her husband, but I was not a good wife. I was a fool. Every time I skipped a meal so Bernice could pay the electric bill, I was actually buying Tiana a manicure. Every time I patched my old coat instead of buying a warm one, I was funding Kyle's vintage wine collection. Every hour of sleep I sacrificed working myself into the ground was not keeping an old woman safe. It was keeping a lazy narcissist in a hot tub. The sadness that had weighed on me for half a decade began to evaporate. In its place, something hotter and sharper started to rise. My hands, which had been trembling with shock, curled into tight fists. My fingernails dug into my palms hard enough to draw blood, but I did not feel the pain. All I could feel was the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. They had used Jamal. They had used his death, his memory, and his name as a PIN code to access my wallet. They knew I would do anything for him, so they turned my love into their personal bank account. They watched me wither away. They watched me age 10 years in 5, and they laughed about it while drinking champagne I paid for. A low sound escaped my throat. It started as a sob, but by the time it left my lips, it was a growl. I stood up so fast, my chair scrapped violently against the floor. I stared at the empty ramen bowl on the counter, the symbol of my poverty and their greed. Enough. I brought my hand down on the kitchen table with a force that made the silverware rattle. The stinging sensation in my palm felt good. It felt real. It woke me up from the trance I had been living in since the day we buried Jamal. I am done being the victim. I am done being the grieving widow who pays for everyone else's sins. I need to see the numbers. I need to see exactly where every single cent went. I grabbed my purse and pulled out my car keys. The bank was closed, but I knew someone who could help me trace the trail of breadcrumbs they thought they had hidden. I was going to find the money, and then I was going to make them pay. The next morning, I bypassed sleep entirely. I scrubbed the smell of the hospital off my skin, put on my sharpest black blazer, and drove straight to the downtown branch of First City Bank. I did not go there to make a deposit. I went there to see Marcus. Marcus had been Jamal's best friend since kindergarten, and he was now the branch manager where Bernice held her accounts. He was the only person in that circle I still trusted, and today I needed him to break the rules. When I walked into his glass-walled office, Marcus looked up with a smile that quickly faded when he saw the dark circles under my eyes and the grim set of my jaw. He closed the blinds immediately. "Keisha, what is wrong? You look like you are ready to go to war." "I am Marcus." I sat down and placed the USB drive on his mahogany desk. "I am not asking you to tell me how much money Bernice has. I know privacy laws. But I need you to tell me where my money is going. For 5 years I have been sending transfers to an account you managed to pay off Jamal's debts. I need to know who the creditor is." Marcus frowned. "Jamal didn't have debts, Keisha. He had a life insurance policy and a pristine credit score. I handled his estate, remember?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew it, but hearing it from a banker made it official. "Just look at the transaction history, Marcus. Please. For Jamal." He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment before turning to his keyboard. The sound of his typing filled the silence. He clicked the mouse a few times, his brow furrowing deeper with every scroll. Then he stopped. His face went pale. "Keisha, you need to see this." I walked around the desk and looked at the screen. There it was, a digital paper trail of my exploitation. Every month on the 15th, a deposit of $400 appeared from my account. And every single month on the 16th, a standing order automatically transferred that exact amount out. It was not going to a loan shark. It was not going to a bank to pay a mortgage. The recipient was listed as K. Jenkins Limit Day Trading Fund. Kyle. My unemployed, lazy brother-in-law was not just drinking my money. He was gambling it away on cryptocurrency and penny stocks, pretending to be a Wall Street wolf. Marcus whispered a curse word under his breath. "He has a standing order set up, Keisha. The memo line says consulting fees. He is stealing from you and using his mother as the bagman." I stared at the screen, watching the rows of numbers blur together. I did the math in my head, even though it made me physically ill. $400 a month, 60 months, $24,000. That was a down payment on a house. That was a new car. That was my freedom. I stood up straight, smoothing the front of my blazer. The sadness was completely gone, now replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Print it, Marcus. Print all of it." He hit the print button without asking questions. As the pages started to slide out of the machine warm and fresh with ink, I realized something. They had stolen $24,000 in cash, but they had stolen something far more valuable. They had stolen my grief. They had monetized my mourning. And now I was going to make sure the interest rate on that debt was higher than they could ever afford to pay. I walked out of the bank with the evidence of financial theft burning a hole in my bag, but my mind was already racing to the next piece of the puzzle. If they lied about the gambling debt, what else were they lying about? For 5 years, Bernice had performed a masterclass in panic. She swore up and down that the mortgage was underwater. She claimed the bank called her daily threatening foreclosure. She made me feel like every dollar I sent was the only thing keeping a roof over her head. She made me believe that without my sacrifice, the family home would be boarded up. I needed to know the truth. I drove home speeding slightly and sat back down at my kitchen table. I did not even take off my blazer. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I navigated to the County Recorder of Deeds website. It is a public database that anyone can access, but most people are too afraid or too busy to check. Public records do not lie, people do. I typed in the address where I had spent so many uncomfortable holidays. 425 Maple Avenue. The search results spun for a second before loading a PDF document that would change the trajectory of my life forever. I braced myself, expecting to see a list of missed payments or a tax lien. I expected to see proof that the house was indeed on the brink of being seized. Instead, I saw a document titled Release of Mortgage, dated exactly 1 month before Jamal died. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer to the screen, reading the legal jargon twice to make sure I was not hallucinating. The status was listed as satisfied. Paid in full. There was no mortgage. There was no bank calling Bernice. Jamal had paid off the entire house 30 days before his aneurysm ruptured. He had cleared the debt to ensure his mother would always have a safe place to live. The house was free and clear. Every time Bernice cried about losing the house, she was performing a script. Every time she took my money for the mortgage, she was pocketing pure profit. But that was not the biggest shock. I scrolled down to the current owner section, expecting to see Bernice Williams listed on the deed. It did not say Bernice Williams. It did not say Kyle or Tiana. In stark black and white text, the owner was listed as the Jamal Williams Revocable Trust. My hands flew to my mouth. A trust. Jamal had not just given the house to his mother. He knew her. He knew how irresponsible she was. He had placed the house in a trust to protect it, and I knew how trusts worked. If Jamal created it, and I was his sole beneficiary and executor of his estate, that meant the control of the trust passed to me. The realization hit me like a physical wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pure adrenaline. I was not just the victim of a scam. I was the landlord. The very people who had banned me from the house, kicked me out of family photos, and treated me like a stray dog were living in my property. They were sleeping in my bedrooms, parking in my driveway, and throwing me out of my own house. I looked at the screen, and for the first time in 5 years, I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a dangerous one. I did not just have the evidence to stop paying them, I had the legal power to evict them. I printed the deed and added it to my file. It was time to go hunting for the original trust documents. The digital proof on my laptop screen was powerful, but I knew it was not enough to win a war against a family of professional liars. I needed the original wet ink signatures. I needed the paper trail that Jamal would have undoubtedly left behind, because my husband was many things, but he was never careless. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the basement of my apartment building, where I kept a storage unit filled with the boxes I had been too heartbroken to unpack since the funeral. The air down there was stale and smelled of damp concrete and cedar wood. I found my unit and unlocked the padlock, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a vibrating intensity of purpose. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, were the remnants of the life Jamal and I had built together. His old college textbooks, his collection of jazz records, and 3 heavy plastic bins labeled office files. I pulled the first bin down and ripped off the lid. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I began to dig. I tossed aside old tax returns and warranty manuals for appliances we no longer owned. I moved with a frantic energy, tearing through folders and envelopes. I needed to find the copy. If the deed said the house was in a trust, then the trust agreement had to be here. Bernice had likely destroyed the original she kept at the house, but she did not know that Jamal always made carbon copies of everything. After 20 minutes of desperate searching, my fingers brushed against a thick leather binder at the bottom of the second bin. It was heavy and smelled faintly of the cologne Jamal used to wear. I pulled it out and opened it on top of a stack of old magazines. The first page made my knees weak. Declaration of the Jamal Williams Revocable Trust. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the legal jargon, until I found Article 4 regarding real property. There it was in black and white. I hereby transfer the property located at 425 Maple Avenue to the trust for the sole benefit of my wife, Keisha Williams. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The house was mine. It had always been mine. But then I read the next paragraph and tears pricked my eyes for a different reason. My mother, Bernice Williams, shall hold a right of occupancy for the duration of her natural life, provided she maintains the property in good condition and remains in good standing with the trustee. He knew. Jamal knew exactly who his mother was. He knew that if he left the house to her, she would leverage it or lose it. So he left it to me to protect her. He gave her a roof over her head, but he gave me the ownership. And the most important phrase in that paragraph was, remains in good standing. Bernice had not remained in good standing. She had lied. She had extorted money. She had committed fraud. She had violated the very conditions Jamal had set to protect her. I closed the binder and hugged it to my chest. For 5 years I thought I was a helpless widow being bullied by a powerful matriarch. But in the dim light of that basement, I realized I was actually the one holding all the cards. I was the owner. She was just a tenant, and a bad tenant can be evicted. I marched up the basement stairs and into the sunlight of the parking lot. I did not go back to my apartment. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the family attorney who I had not spoken to since the probate hearing. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Henderson, this is Keisha Williams. I found the binder. You were right about everything. I am done being nice. Draft the eviction notice. I want them out of my house. I hung up with the attorney and felt a surge of power rushing through my veins, but I knew I needed one final confirmation before I pulled the trigger. I needed to look them in the eye and see exactly who they were when I had nothing left to give. I needed to strip away the money and see if there was even a single ounce of humanity left in that house. I went back upstairs to my apartment and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I took a rough washcloth and scrubbed off the mascara and concealer I had applied for the bank meeting earlier. I let the dark purple circles under my eyes shine through. I went to the back of my closet and bypassed my professional nursing scrubs and blazers, digging out an old gray hoodie with a frayed cuff and a pair of faded sweatpants that had seen better days. I pulled my hair back into a messy, loose bun, letting flyaways frame my face. I studied my reflection. I did not look like the owner of a mortgage-free 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. I did not look like a woman who held the legal power to evict 3 adults. I looked like a broken, exhausted widow on the edge of a nervous breakdown. I looked exactly like the victim they thought they had created. Perfect. I got back into my rattling Honda and drove the familiar route to Maple Avenue. Usually this drive filled me with anxiety about whether my transfer had gone through fast enough or if Bernice was disappointed in me. Today the drive felt like a military operation. As I turned onto the street, I saw it, the house, my house. The afternoon sun hit the fresh landscaping they had bought with my money, and it looked beautiful. But then I saw the driveway. Bernice's old sedan was parked next to a brand new leasing vehicle, a shiny black SUV with chrome rims that screamed luxury. Kyle's ride. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. They were living like royalty in my kingdom while treating me like a peasant. I parked on the street because I was not allowed in the driveway. That was their rule. I sat in the car for a moment practicing my lines. I had to sell this performance. I had to make them believe the well had truly run dry. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of grief and exhaustion I had felt over the last 5 years. It was not hard to find. The ghost of the old Keisha, the one who just wanted to be loved by her husband's family, was still in there somewhere. I let her take the wheel one last time. I walked up the concrete path, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I could hear music coming from inside. It was loud, upbeat R&B blasting from a high-quality sound system. I reached out and rang the doorbell. The music stopped abruptly. I heard heavy footsteps approaching the door. The door swung open and there stood Kyle. He was wearing a silk robe that was open at the chest and holding a half-eaten turkey leg. When he saw me, his face twisted into a scowl of pure irritation. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking my view inside, and looked at me like I was a solicitor trying to sell him something he did not want. "What do you want, Keisha?" he grunted, wiping grease from his mouth with the back of his hand. "Bernice is resting. We are busy." I stepped past Kyle into the living room, and the scent of expensive lavender potpourri hit me instantly. The last time I was here, the carpet was beige and stained. Now, beneath my worn-out sneakers lay a pristine white Persian rug that probably cost more than my car. Bernice was lounging on a brand-new cream-colored leather sectional watching a soap opera on a television screen the size of a movie theater. She looked up, her eyes scanning my outfit with immediate disapproval. "Keisha, what in the world are you wearing? You look like you just rolled out of a dumpster. Where is your uniform?" I wrung my hands together, letting my shoulders slump intentionally. I needed to sell this performance. I kept my head down, playing the part of the defeated woman they wanted me to be. "I need to talk to you, Mama Bernice," I said, my voice trembling. "It is bad news. Real bad." She sighed loudly, picking up the remote and pausing her show with an exaggerated dramatic flair. "Well, spit it out. I hope you are not here to ask for the money back because I already sent it to the loan shark. You know they do not give refunds." I took a shaky breath and looked her in the eye. "It is the hospital, Mama. They did a massive round of layoffs this morning. My position was cut. I lost my job. I waited. In any normal family, this would be the moment for comfort. I waited for her to stand up and hug me. I waited for her to say that we would figure it out together, because that is what family does." Instead, Bernice's face hardened into a mask of stone. The warmth vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating stare. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask how I was going to eat. She stood up slowly, the silk of her robe rustling like the skin of a snake. "So what are you saying, Keisha?" She crossed her arms over her chest. "You are saying you do not have my $400 for next month?" I blinked, forcing tears into my eyes. "Mama, I just told you I lost my livelihood. I have no severance. I have no savings. I can barely afford rent, let alone the debt payments." Bernice let out a harsh, cruel laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Do not come here crying to me about your rent. You are young. You have 2 hands and a strong back. Go scrub toilets. Go flip burgers. Go sell your blood for all I care. But do not you dare stand there and tell me you are cutting off my support. That money is for Jamal's debt. Do you want him to roll over in his grave because his wife is too lazy to find work?" The cruelty of her words stung, even though I knew the truth. She was not protecting Jamal. She was protecting her lifestyle. Just then, Tiana walked in from the kitchen, holding a bag of gourmet popcorn. She leaned against the doorframe, looking me up and down like I was a stain on her new rug. "God, you are pathetic," Tiana sneered. "Mom is right. You always were a quitter. Jamal married you out of pity, and now you cannot even handle a simple monthly payment. Look at you. You are a mess." I looked down at the floor, hiding the fire that was starting to burn behind my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I owned the very floor they were standing on. But I forced a single tear to run down my cheek instead. "I do not know what I am going to do," I whispered, making my voice sound small and broken. "I might lose my apartment next week." Tiana snorted a sound filled with pure derision. She popped a kernel of popcorn into her mouth and smirked, shaking her head. "Well, you better figure it out fast. Because if you think you are moving your broke self in here with us, you are out of your mind." Kyle pushed himself off the doorframe and walked toward me with a swagger that made my blood boil. He was wearing a Rolex that I knew for a fact he did not own 3 months ago. He stopped just inches from my face, smelling of expensive cologne and arrogance. He looked me in the eye with the pitying expression of a man watching a bug struggle on its back. "You know what your problem is, Keisha," he said, picking a piece of turkey out of his teeth. "It is not the economy. It is not the hospital. It is your mindset. You have a poverty mentality." I almost laughed out loud. Here was a man who had not punched a time clock since Obama was in office lecturing me about work ethic. Here was a man who was currently embezzling my money under the guise of day trading, telling me I was poor because I did not think rich. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my voice low and trembling. Kyle sighed, shaking his head as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "Wealth is a vibration, Keisha. You attract what you are. Right now you are attracting failure because you are vibrating at a frequency of desperation. You come in here crying about losing a job. A winner would see that as an opportunity to pivot, to hustle." He walked over to the wet bar and poured himself a glass of amber liquid. I watched him drink it, knowing I had paid for every drop in that bottle. "We cannot carry dead weight in this family," he continued, gesturing around the room with his glass. "Bernice has expenses. This house requires upkeep. The lifestyle we maintain requires liquidity. If you cannot provide cash flow from your job, then you need to get creative." "Creative?" I asked, tightening my grip on my purse strap where my phone was silently recording every word. "What do you mean creative, Kyle?" He shrugged. "I do not know. Sell that piece of junk car and walk, liquidate your assets, or get your hands dirty. My buddy runs a cleaning crew downtown. They scrub floors in office buildings at night. It is minimum wage, but it is better than coming here empty-handed." Tiana giggled from the kitchen. "Or you could sell plasma. Do not they pay $50 a pop for that? You have plenty of blood, Keisha. Put it to good use." Kyle snapped his fingers, pointing at his wife. "See, that is the abundance mindset. There is always money if you are willing to bleed for it. Literally." He leaned in close again, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Listen to me, Keisha. I do not care if you have to scrub toilets, sell your hair, or stand on a street corner. You need to come up with that $400 by the 15th. Bernice is too nice to say it, but I am not. If the money stops, you are dead to us. Do you understand?" My hand inside my pocket curled into a fist, so tight my nails cut into my palm. The urge to slap the smirk off his face was overwhelming. I wanted to scream that I was the only reason he was not living in a cardboard box. I wanted to tell him that his abundance mindset was actually just felony fraud. But I did not. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I needed this. I needed his cruelty on tape. I needed a jury to hear him telling a widow to sell her blood to pay for his champagne. "I understand, Kyle," I whispered, forcing my head down in submission. "I will figure it out, I promise." "Good girl," he sneered, patting me on the cheek with a condescending tap that took every ounce of my willpower not to break his finger. "Now get out of here. You are ruining the vibe." I looked past Kyle's smug face and focused on the woman sitting on the leather sofa. The woman who had birthed my husband. The woman who had cried on my shoulder at the funeral and promised that we would always take care of each other. I made one last desperate attempt to find a shred of decency in her soul. "Mama Bernice," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Please. It is me. It is Keisha, Jamal's wife. I am not asking for money. I am just asking for a little understanding. If Jamal were here, he would not want you to treat me like this. He would want us to be a family, not a business transaction." I saw a flicker of emotion cross Bernice's face. For a second I thought it was shame. I was wrong. It was pure, unadulterated rage. She stood up so abruptly that her wineglass wobbled on the coffee table. She marched over to the fireplace mantel where a framed 8x10 photograph of Jamal and me on our wedding day sat. It was the only picture of us in the entire room, pushed off to the side behind a vase of fake orchids. She grabbed the frame with a manic grip. Her knuckles turned white. "Do not you dare," she hissed. "Do not you dare bring his name into this house to manipulate me. You think because you married him for 5 minutes you know what he would want. I am his mother. I knew him before you were even born." "Mama, please put the picture down," I pleaded, taking a step forward. She did not put it down. She looked at the photo with a sneer of disgust, as if the image of her son's happiness was offensive to her. "He is dead. Keisha," she screamed. "He is gone. He is in the ground. He cannot pay my bills. He cannot keep the lights on. And apparently neither can his useless wife. So what good is he to me now? What good are you? With a motion that seemed to happen in slow motion, she raised her arm and hurled the silver frame across the room. It did not land on the soft rug. It smashed violently against the hardwood floor right at my feet. The glass shattered instantly, sending shards skittering across the polished wood. The photo of Jamal's smiling face lay face down in the debris. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Even Kyle looked surprised by the outburst, stepping back slightly. Bernice stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. "Get out," she spat, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "If you do not have my money by the 15th, do not bother coming back, and take that trash with you. I do not want to look at failures anymore." I lowered my eyes to the floor, submitting to her cruelty one last time. The shards of glass from the picture frame crunched beneath my worn-out sneakers as I took a step back. I clutched the photo of Jamal to my chest, feeling the sharp corner dig into my skin. It was a grounding pain. It reminded me that the man in the photo would never have wanted this for me. I looked up at Bernice, who was still standing there with her chest heaving, waiting for me to scream back. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to beg. But I knew that the most dangerous thing a person can do is remain silent when they are expected to explode. "I understand, Mama," I said, my voice trembling with a perfect mix of fear and desperation. "You are right. I cannot let Jamal down. I cannot let his debts go unpaid." Bernice's shoulders relaxed slightly. The rage in her eyes was replaced by a familiar look of triumph. She thought she had broken me again. She thought her little display of violence had put the scared widow back in her place. "I will find the money." I continued, wiping a tear from my cheek. "I do not know how yet. Maybe I will sell my car. Maybe I will take Kyle's advice and find a second job cleaning floors. But I will get you the $400. Kyle chuckled from the doorway, taking another bite of his turkey leg. "That is the spirit, Keisha. I knew you would see reason. Only losers accept defeat. Winners find liquidity." I forced myself to nod at him. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood just to keep from laughing in his face. "You are right, Kyle. I need to be a winner." I turned toward the door, my hand resting on the brass knob. I paused, looking back at them. They were already losing interest in me. Bernice was reaching for her wine glass, and Tiana was scrolling on her phone. They dismissed me as easily as they would a servant. "I will see you all on Thursday," I said, my voice strengthening just a fraction. "For Thanksgiving." Bernice waved a hand dismissively without looking up. "Only if you have the money, Keisha. Do not come here to eat my food if you cannot pay your dues." I smiled. A genuine cold smile that they could not see because my back was turned. "Oh, I will have it, I promised. And I will bring something else too. A big surprise. Something that will solve all of our financial problems forever." Bernice perked up at that. Curiosity flashed across her face. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" "You will see," I said, opening the door. "Let us just say, I am finally going to give this family exactly what it deserves." I stepped out into the cool autumn air and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The click of the latch sounded like the hammer of a gun being cocked. I walked down the concrete path past the perfectly manicured hedges and the brand new SUV that my double shifts had paid for. When I reached my car, I stopped. I did not get in immediately. I turned around and looked at the house. From the outside, it looked like a fortress of wealth and stability. The brick facade was imposing. The windows were gleaming, and the golden light spilling from the living room looked inviting. Anyone driving by would think a happy, successful family lived there. They saw a home. I saw a crime scene. I looked at the second-floor window to the master bedroom where Bernice slept. I looked at the garage where Kyle kept his toys. For 5 years I had looked at this place with longing, wishing I could be part of the warmth inside. Now I looked at it with the critical eye of a landlord inspecting a property before an eviction. "Enjoy the heat, Bernice," I whispered to the wind. "Enjoy the wine, Kyle. Enjoy the jacuzzi, Tiana, because this is the last week you will ever sleep under my roof. I got into my car and placed the rescued photo of Jamal on the passenger seat. He looked happy in the picture. He looked like he was cheering me on. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. As I drove down Maple Avenue, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. Bernice was watching from the window, a satisfied smirk on her face. She thought she had won. She had no idea she had just invited the executioner to dinner. I sat in the conference room of Henderson and Associates, surrounded by walls of glass that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The air here was cool and smelled of expensive coffee and old books, a stark contrast to the suffocating lavender scent of Bernice's house. Mr. Henderson sat across from me. He was a sharp man in his 60s with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my car. He was Jamal's lawyer and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my husband's estate planning. I slid the heavy binder across the polished mahogany table, along with a stack of printed bank statements and photocopies of every check I had ever written to Bernice. "I want them out, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "I want them out yesterday." He opened the binder and adjusted his glasses. He scanned the trust document, quickly nodding as he reconfirmed the clauses he had written years ago. Then he picked up the stack of check copies. He flipped through them one by one, his brow furrowing in concentration. Suddenly he stopped. He looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Keisha, did you write this on every single check?" I nodded. "Yes. Jamal told me to. He said if I ever had to give his mother money, I should always document what it was for. So I wrote rent in the memo line. Every month. For 5 years." Mr. Henderson let out a low whistle of appreciation. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the paper against his chin. "You did not just document the payments, Keisha. You inadvertently set a legal trap that is going to make this eviction airtight." He stood up and walked over to a whiteboard, uncapping a marker. In the eyes of the law family, disputes over property can be messy. Judges hate kicking grandmothers out on the street, especially if they claim they have a life estate or a right to be there based on family promises. But Bernice got greedy. He wrote the words "tenancy at will" on the board in large letters. By accepting these checks with the specific notation of rent, Bernice entered into a verbal lease agreement with you. She is not a guest. She is not a squatter with squatter rights. She is a tenant, and you are her landlord. He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with professional excitement. "And here is the kicker. Since there is no written lease specifying a duration, this is considered a month-to-month tenancy. In Illinois, a landlord can terminate a month-to-month tenancy for any reason with 30 days' notice. But because she has damaged the property you mentioned, she smashed a picture frame and threw your husband's belongings in the trash. That constitutes destruction of property and creating a nuisance." He slammed the marker cap back on. "We do not need to fight a long probate battle over the trust's morality clause, although we could win that too. This is faster. This is a standard eviction. She accepted your money as rent, which means she accepted your authority as the owner. She cashed away her defense." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years I thought those checks were proof of my weakness. I thought they were evidence of how easily I could be manipulated. I had no idea they were actually the paper trail of my victory. "So what is the next step?" I asked, feeling a smile tug at the corners of my lips for the first time in days. Mr. Henderson pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and picked up his gold pen. "The next step is simple. We prepare the notice to quit. We serve them. And if they do not leave, we call the sheriff. But since you mentioned a Thanksgiving dinner—" He paused, looking at me with a knowing glint in his eye. "If you want to serve them the notice yourself in person, that is entirely legal. It might be a little dramatic, but given what they have put you through, I would say it is justified." I stood up and shook his hand. It was firm and reassuring. "Draw it up, Mr. Henderson. I will deliver it myself. I think it will go perfectly with the turkey." I drove straight from the law firm to the apartment complex, my mind buzzing with the strategy Mr. Henderson had laid out. The paperwork in the passenger seat was my shield, but I knew I needed a sword. I needed someone who could stand in that room and look Bernice in the eye and strip away her mask of respectability. I needed a witness who commanded respect and feared no one. I pulled into the parking lot and looked up at Unit 4B. Mrs. Johnson was sitting on her balcony in her usual spot, watching the neighborhood with the vigilance of a hawk. She saw me pull in and leaned over the railing, her eyes narrowing as she took in my appearance. I was still wearing the frantic disguise of the broke widow, but my posture had changed. I was walking taller. I climbed the stairs to her landing. Before I could even knock, she opened the door. The smell of collard greens and spices wafted out, wrapping around me like a warm hug. "Come in, child," she said, holding the door open. "You look like a woman who just found a weapon." I walked into her living room, which was cluttered with porcelain figurines and photos of her grandchildren. I sat down on her floral sofa and placed the heavy legal folder on the coffee table. "Mrs. Johnson, you were right. About everything. I told her what I found. I told her about the trust, the paid-off mortgage, and the standing order to Kyle's trading account. I told her that for 5 years I had been paying rent to live in a hell of my own making." Mrs. Johnson listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, as every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. When I finished, she sat back in her armchair and folded her hands. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. I leaned forward. "I am going to evict them. I have the papers drawn up. I am going to serve them at Thanksgiving dinner in front of the pastor and all their high society friends. I am going to expose every lie they have told." A slow smile spread across Mrs. Johnson's face. "That sounds like justice." "It is," I said. "But I need one more thing. I have the documents and the bank records, but Bernice is a master manipulator. She will cry. She will say I forged the papers. She will try to turn the room against me before I can finish speaking. I need a witness. Someone who saw the champagne. Someone who saw the jacuzzi. Someone whose word in this community is iron." I looked her in the eye. "I need you to come to dinner, Mrs. Johnson." She looked at me surprised. "You want me to go to Bernice's house? That woman has not spoken to me in 10 years because she thinks she is too good to associate with people who live in apartments." "Exactly," I said. "She thinks she is untouchable. She thinks nobody sees what happens behind her fences." "But you saw. I need you to stand there and tell the truth. I need you to tell them about the parties and the arrogance while I was starving." Mrs. Johnson looked at the legal folder, then at me. I could see the wheels turning. She had watched Jamal grow up. She had watched me suffer. And she had watched Bernice strut around like a queen on a throne built of stolen money. She stood up slowly and walked over to her calendar on the wall. She picked up a red marker and circled Thursday. "Honey, you do not have to ask me twice. I have hated that woman since she made fun of my hat at the church picnic in '98. She turned back to me, her eyes twinkling with a mix of righteous indignation and pure anticipation. "I will wear my Sunday best, and I will bring my special sweet potato pie. It might be the only sweet thing that family tastes that night. I have been waiting for this day for a long time." I returned to my apartment with a sense of purpose I had not felt since nursing school. My dining room table was no longer a place for lonely meals. It was now a war room. I laid out the bank statements Mr. Henderson had printed along with the trust documents and the deed to the house. It was a mountain of paper, but I needed to turn it into a weapon that even the most oblivious relative could not ignore. I packed the laptop, the cables, and the printed documents into my work bag. Then I reached into my closet and pulled out a portable high-definition projector I had borrowed from the hospital education department. It was small enough to hide under a napkin, but bright enough to illuminate the truth in even the darkest room. I tested it against my living room wall. The image of the deed showing my name as the owner projected crisp and bright against the plaster. I stood back and looked at my arsenal. It was not just paper and pixels. It was my dignity. It was 5 years of silence weaponized into a presentation that would burn their reputation to the ground. I was not going to Thanksgiving to eat turkey. I was going to serve an indictment. I checked the batteries in the remote and placed everything by the door. The evidence was ready. Now I just needed to make sure I looked the part of the executioner. The next 48 hours were not spent in tears or anxiety. They were spent in reconstruction. For 5 years, I had worn my grief like a heavy, shapeless cloak. I had dressed in muted colors, wore shoes with holes in them, and kept my head down playing the perfect role of the invisible suffering wife. But that role was finished. The curtain had finally fallen on that pathetic performance. If I was going to walk into that house and execute a legal eviction, I needed to look like the person who owned the deed. I needed to look like a landlord, not a beggar. I started at the salon on the north side of the city, a place I used to visit when Jamal was alive, but had avoided for half a decade because of the cost. I sat in the chair and looked at the stylist. I told her to cut off the dead weight. I watched as locks of damaged hair fell to the tiled floor, taking 5 years of depression and neglect with them. When she spun the chair around, the woman staring back at me was sharp. Her angles were defined. Her eyes were clear and dangerous. The messy bun was gone, replaced by a sleek, powerful cut that framed my face like a helmet of war. Next came the spa. I spent money I would have normally saved for bills to scrub my skin until it glowed, washing away the gray pallor of exhaustion that Bernice loved to mock. I wanted to look expensive. I wanted to smell like success, not bleach and hospital sanitizer. But the most important stop was the boutique on Michigan Avenue. I walked past the sensible beige suits and the modest black dresses that were appropriate for a widow. I went straight to the rack that held the color of warning, the color of blood, the color of power. I pulled out a structured crimson dress that looked like it was cut from pure confidence. It was bold, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. It was tight enough to show I was alive and vibrant, but tailored enough to command absolute respect. I looked at the price tag, $400, the exact amount I had sent Bernice every month for 5 years. The irony was delicious. I took it to the register and swiped my debit card without a moment of hesitation. This was not a frivolous expense. It was an investment in my resurrection. While I was preparing my war paint on the other side of town, the atmosphere inside the house on Maple Avenue was beginning to curdle. It was Wednesday evening, the night before Thanksgiving, and the kitchen was piled high with expensive groceries that I had unknowingly paid for. There were organic turkeys, bottles of premium wine, and boxes of gourmet chocolates. But despite the abundance, Bernice was pacing the hardwood floor like a caged animal. She checked her phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. The screen remained dark. No texts, no missed calls, no desperate voicemails begging for forgiveness. For 5 years, Bernice had trained me to be responsive. If she sneezed, I was supposed to say "bless you" within seconds. This silence was not just unusual, it was terrifying her. She knew deep down that her lifestyle was a house of cards built on my compliance, and if I removed the foundation, the whole thing would collapse. "She is not answering," Bernice hissed, slamming her phone down on the granite countertop. I called her 3 times. It goes straight to voicemail. What if she really lost her job, Kyle? What if she really does not have the money? Tiana was sitting at the kitchen island filing her nails with a look of supreme boredom. She blew the dust off her manicure and rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Mama, relax," Tiana said. "She is probably just sulking. You know how she gets. She wants us to chase her so she can play the victim. It is her favorite role. She wants you to call her and tell her everything is going to be okay, so she can feel special." "I do not care about her feelings," Tiana Bernice snapped. "I care about the 15th. I already spent the transfer money on the catering and your husband's new golf clubs. If she shows up tomorrow empty-handed, we are going to have a very awkward conversation with the bank next week." Kyle walked into the room carrying a tumbler of amber liquid. He looked completely unbothered. He leaned against the refrigerator with the relaxed posture of a man who has never faced a consequence in his life. "You two are stressing over nothing," Kyle said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You are giving Keisha way too much credit. You think she has the backbone to ghost us. Please. This is the woman who apologized to me when I backed into her car last Christmas. He walked over to the counter and picked up a grape, popping it into his mouth. So where is she then? Bernice asked, her voice rising an octave. Kyle chuckled, shaking his head. Use your brain, Bernice. She is desperate. She knows she is on thin ice. Right now, she is probably sitting in a payday loan office in the bad part of town, signing her life away at 300% interest just to get cash for us. He gestured with his glass. Or she is at a pawn shop selling her grandmother's jewelry. Or she is begging her boss for an advance. That is what people like her do. They scramble. She is terrified of losing us, Bernice. She thinks without this family, she is nobody. She is not ignoring us, she is hustling for us. Bernice stopped pacing. She looked at Kyle, wanting desperately to believe him. The idea that I was out there degrading myself to secure their comfort was a soothing thought to her. You really think so? Bernice asked. I know so, Kyle said with a smirk. She is not smart enough to leave us, and she is definitely not brave enough to fight us. Mark my words. Tomorrow she is going to walk through that door with a store-bought pie in one hand and an envelope of cash in the other, looking for a pat on the head. She is a golden goose, Bernice, and golden geese do not fly away. They just lay eggs until they die. Bernice let out a long sigh and picked up her wine glass. You are right. I am worrying for nothing. She will be here. She has nowhere else to go. Tiana laughed. Well, she better bring the money, because if she brings that depressing energy to my dinner party, I am going to make her eat in the kitchen with the help. They toasted to their own cleverness, oblivious to the fact that the goose wasn't laying eggs anymore. The goose was sharpening a knife. The apartment was silent, but it was not empty. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that always comes before a violent storm. I sat at my small dining table, the only light coming from the street lamps outside filtering through the blinds. In front of me sat the photograph of Jamal that I had rescued from the trash. The glass was gone, shattered on Bernice's hardwood floor, but the image remained. He was smiling, that crooked smile that used to make my knees weak, the one that made me feel safe in a world that often felt hostile. I struck a match. The sound of the friction was loud in the quiet room. I watched the small flame dance to life before lowering it to the wick of the vanilla candle Jamal used to love. As the scent filled the air, I felt the tears finally stop. I was done crying. Crying was for the helpless, and I was not helpless anymore. I ran my finger over the edge of the photo frame. I am sorry, Jamal, I whispered into the darkness. I am so sorry I let them turn your memory into a weapon. I let them use your name to pick my pockets. I let them use your death to fund their greed. I thought I was being a good wife. I thought I was keeping the peace. But there is no peace when you are being held hostage. For 5 years, Bernice had told me that I owed her. She told me that I was the lucky one because Jamal chose me. She made me feel like an imposter in my own marriage. But looking at his face now in the flickering candlelight, I realized the truth. Jamal did not choose me because he pitied me. He chose me because he saw something in me that I had forgotten existed. He saw a fighter. He saw a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet. I looked over at the closet door where the red dress hung. In the shadows, it looked like a silhouette of blood and fire. It was not just a piece of clothing. It was a uniform. Tomorrow I would put it on, and I would walk into that house, not as the daughter-in-law they tolerated, but as the woman who held the deed to their existence. I picked up the stack of papers from the table, the bank statements, the trust documents, the eviction notice. They felt heavy in my hands, not with the weight of burden, but with the weight of justice. I was going to strip them of their comfort. I was going to take back the roof over their heads. I was going to expose the rot that had been hiding behind their expensive smiles. Bernice thought she was safe, Kyle thought he was smart, Tiana thought she was superior. They were sleeping soundly tonight, dreaming of the turkey dinner I paid for and the wine they would drink while mocking me. Let them sleep. Let them enjoy one last night of delusion. I blew out the candle, watching the smoke curl up into the darkness like a ghost. I placed my hand over Jamal's picture one last time. "Rest easy, baby," I said, my voice hard as stone. "I will handle it from here." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the distant lights of the suburbs. A cold smile touched my lips. They think tomorrow is Thanksgiving. They think we are going to say grace and pretend to be a happy family. They have no idea. Tomorrow is not a holiday. It is an execution. Tomorrow they will know what hell is. The house on Maple Avenue was glowing like a beacon of prosperity against the dark November sky. Inside, the air was thick with the rich, savory scent of roasted turkey and the cloying perfume of fresh lilies. Bernice had spared no expense for this performance. The dining table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates that she usually kept locked away in the china cabinet. A massive floral centerpiece sat in the middle of the table, surrounded by crystal wine glasses that sparkled under the chandelier light. Guests began to filter in, filling the spacious living room with the hum of polite conversation. These were the people Bernice cared about most. There was Aunt Sarah, who was the biggest gossip in the church choir. There were distant cousins from the South Side who looked around the lavish home with envious eyes. And most importantly, there was Pastor Jenkins, a tall, solemn man in a dark suit who held the highest social standing in their community. Bernice moved through the crowd like a queen holding court. She was wearing a shimmering gold dress that I knew for a fact cost $600 because I had seen the withdrawal on the bank statement just 2 days ago. She gripped a glass of white wine in one hand and touched people on the shoulder with the other, playing the role of the benevolent matriarch to perfection. "Oh, Pastor Jenkins, I am so glad you could make it," Bernice cooed, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "It has been such a hard year for us. Losing Jamal left such a hole in our hearts, but the Lord has been good. He has provided." Pastor Jenkins nodded solemnly, holding her hand. "You are a pillar of strength, Bernice. To maintain this home and keep your family together after such a tragedy is a testament to your faith." Bernice lowered her eyes modestly. "We do what we must, Pastor. I just try to keep things nice for the children. I want them to know that even in grief we can still have abundance." Across the room, Kyle was holding court by the wet bar. He was pouring generous servings of the expensive scotch I had paid for into heavy tumblers for the male cousins. He laughed loudly, clapping his hand on his chest as he told a story about a business deal that I knew never happened. "Yeah, the market is volatile right now," Kyle said, swirling his drink. "But you have to know when to hold and when to strike. That is how we afford the finer things in life. Smart investments, gentlemen. Smart investments." Tiana was showing off her new diamond earrings to a group of female cousins. She tossed her hair back, letting the light catch the stones. "Oh, these old things," she giggled. "Kyle surprised me with them last week. He spoils me rotten. I told him we should be saving, but he insists that a woman should always sparkle." The hypocrisy in the room was so thick it was almost suffocating. Every bite of appetizer being passed around, every drop of alcohol being poured, every compliment being paid to Bernice's resilience was funded by the exhaustion of a woman they had not even bothered to ask about. They were celebrating their own greatness on a stage built entirely on my credit. Bernice clapped her hands together to get the room's attention. Her voice rang out clear and authoritative. "Everyone, please find your seats in the dining room. The turkey is ready, and I want us to say a special prayer of gratitude before we eat. We have so much to be thankful for this year." The guests began to shuffle toward the dining room, murmuring their appreciation for the beautiful spread. Bernice stood at the head of the table, smiling benevolently at her flock. She checked her watch briefly, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face when she realized one chair was still empty, but she quickly smoothed her expression back into one of saintly patience. She had no idea that the guest she was waiting for was not coming to eat. She was coming to collect. The chatter in the dining room was at its peak when the front door chime echoed through the house. Bernice sighed loud enough for the table to hear and smoothed the napkin on her lap. She signaled to Kyle to get the door. I could imagine her internal monologue perfectly. She was expecting a broken woman in a faded coat holding a store-bought pumpkin pie as a peace offering. She was expecting an apology. She was expecting the victim she had created. Kyle walked to the foyer and pulled the heavy oak door open. The cold November wind rushed in, but I did not feel it. I was burning with adrenaline. I stepped across the threshold, and the sound of my stilettos clicking on the marble entry floor rang out like gunshots. The silence that fell over the house was immediate and absolute. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks hovered halfway to mouths. Every head turned toward the entryway, and for a moment nobody moved. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I was not the Keisha they knew. The Keisha they knew was gray and small and apologetic. The woman standing in their hallway was aflame. The crimson dress hugged every curve of my body, its vibrant color screaming for attention against the muted beige tones of Bernice's decor. My hair was sleek and sharp. My makeup was flawless. I stood tall, my chin raised, looking over the room with the cool detachment of a judge surveying a courtroom. I saw the shock register on Kyle's face first. His jaw literally dropped. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the dress with a mix of confusion and something that looked disturbingly like hunger. He stepped back instinctively, clearing the path for me to enter the main living area. He did not have a smart remark this time. He just stared. I walked past him without a word. I felt the gaze of every guest on me. I saw Aunt Sarah nudge her husband and point. I saw Pastor Jenkins lower his wine glass, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Then I saw Tiana. She was sitting near the head of the table, and her face was a mask of pure, unfiltered jealousy. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned my outfit, calculating the cost of the fabric, the shoes, and the bag. She knew. She knew this was not a dress from a discount rack. She looked down at her own outfit and frowned, realizing she had been outshined at her own party. She gripped her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. Bernice stood up from the head of the table, her chair scrapped harshly against the floor, breaking the trance. She did not look impressed. She looked furious. She marched over to me, her gold dress shimmering, but looking cheap next to the deep blood red of mine. She stopped inches from my face, her eyes scanning me for the envelope of cash she was desperate for. She ignored the guests watching us. Her greed was too strong to hide. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Bernice said, her voice dripping with venom. "You certainly are dressed up for someone who claimed to be destitute just 2 days ago." She looked pointedly at my hands, which were empty except for my leather bag. She crossed her arms, blocking my path to the dining room. "I hope you have something for me in that fancy bag, Keisha. Did you bring the money, or did you just come here to eat my food and mooch off my charity again?" I did not answer Bernice immediately. Instead, I smiled a tight, mysterious smile that made her frown deepen. I walked past her and took the only empty seat at the table, which was conspicuously placed right next to the kitchen door, away from the head of the table where the important people sat. It was the seat usually reserved for children or unwanted guests. I placed my leather bag on the floor next to me, making sure the laptop was safe, and settled into the chair with the grace of a queen taking her throne. As the soup was served, Kyle decided it was time to start the entertainment. He buttered a roll aggressively and looked across the table at me, his eyes full of mockery. "Hey, Keisha, I saw that heap of metal you call a car parked on the street. I am surprised that thing even started in this cold. You know the homeowners association is going to fine us if you keep parking that eyesore in front of the property. It drags down the property value just having it near the driveway." He gestured toward the window where his shiny new black SUV was visible under the streetlights. "You should really look into upgrading. I mean, look at my truck. That is what success looks like. It is smooth, powerful, and reliable. But I guess not everyone has the financial intelligence to drive a vehicle like that." Tiana giggled, covering her mouth with a linen napkin. "Oh, stop it, Kyle. She cannot help it. Not everyone has your business acumen." She turned to me, her eyes scanning my red dress with suspicion and envy. "Although I am confused, Keisha. You told us on Monday you were broke. You said you lost your job, but here you are wearing a dress that looks like it cost a month of rent. Did you spend your last dime trying to impress us?" Is that a rental or did you find it at a thrift store? I picked up my wine glass. It was filled with cheap table wine while everyone else had the expensive vintage I had paid for. I did not mind. I took a slow sip and looked Tiana dead in the eye. It is amazing what you can find when you look in the right places, Tiana, I said calmly. Some things are just hidden, waiting to be discovered, like assets or truth. Pastor Jenkins cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the tension. He looked at me with genuine kindness, ignoring the hostility coming from the other side of the table. It is good to see you, Keisha. We have missed you at Sunday service. How are you holding up, really? It has been 5 years since Jamal passed, but grief has its own timeline. Are you finding peace? I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to tell him that there is no peace when you are being hunted. I wanted to tell him that the woman sitting next to him was a predator. But before I could get a single word out, Bernice slammed her hand down on the table, interrupting me. "Oh, Pastor, she is doing the best she can," Bernice said loud and sharp, cutting me off completely. "She is just struggling to find her footing. You know how young people are today. They lack direction. Keisha has been having a very hard time managing her finances since Jamal passed. She comes to us for help constantly. It is a heavy burden on us, but what can a mother do? We support her. We give and give until it hurts, because that is what Jamal would have wanted." She looked at me with a warning glare, daring me to contradict her. Her eyes said, "Be quiet or else." "Eat your soup, Keisha," she commanded, pointing at my bowl like I was a toddler. "And try not to make a mess. We are discussing adult matters now." The massive turkey sat in the center of the table, glistening with glaze, and surrounded by platters of stuffing and candied yams. It was a feast fit for royalty, and everyone at the table was preparing to indulge. Kyle was already reaching for the carving knife, his eyes fixed on the meat with greedy anticipation. Bernice was signaling the maid to pour more wine. The conversation had turned to the upcoming Christmas holiday, and Tiana was loudly listing the expensive gifts she expected to receive. It was the perfect moment. They were comfortable. They were full. They felt safe in their castle. I picked up my salad fork and tapped it firmly against the side of my crystal wine glass. The sharp, high-pitched ringing sound cut through the chatter like a siren. Clink, clink, clink. The noise silenced the room instantly. Kyle froze with the carving knife hovering over the bird. Bernice dropped her napkin and looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and warning. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Keisha, what are you doing?" Bernice hissed under her breath. "Put that fork down. We are about to say grace. Do not make a spectacle of yourself." I did not put the fork down. Instead, I placed it gently on the tablecloth and pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the floor as I stood up. In my red dress and heels, I towered over them. I felt a surge of power radiating from my chest. For 5 years, I had made myself small so they could feel big. Today, I was taking up all the space in the room. I looked around the table, making eye contact with every single person. I looked at Pastor Jenkins, who watched me with concern. I looked at Aunt Sarah, who was already leaning forward, eager for drama. Finally, I rested my gaze on Bernice. "I am sorry to interrupt dinner," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "But before we cut into this beautiful bird, there is something I need to address." Kyle groaned, rolling his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Oh God, here we go. Can we save the sob story for dessert, Keisha? I am starving." I ignored him. I kept my eyes locked on his mother. "You mentioned earlier, Bernice, that you are worried about my finances. You told the pastor and everyone here that I am struggling, that I lack direction, that I am a burden on this family because I cannot manage my money." Bernice crossed her arms defensively. "Well, it is the truth, Keisha. I was only explaining why you could not contribute to the meal." I nodded slowly. "You are right. Transparency is important in a family. And since you have all been so concerned about my financial situation, and since you have all had so much to say about my poverty, I thought it was time I gave you a full report. I want to show you exactly where the money has gone." Bernice looked confused. Her eyes darted to the leather bag at my feet. She licked her lips. She thought I was about to pull out an envelope of cash. She thought this was a speech about how I had sold my car to pay her. A smug smile began to return to her face. "Well, that is very responsible of you," Keisha, Bernice said, smoothing her dress. "Go ahead. We are listening." I smiled back at her, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a predator who has just trapped its prey. "I am glad you are listening," I said. "But I think it is better if you watch." I reached down into my bag. Bernice leaned forward, her hand instinctively reaching out to accept the money, but I did not pull out cash. I did not pull out a checkbook. My hand emerged holding a small black remote control. The confusion on their faces was absolute. Tiana frowned, looking from the remote to me. Bernice froze, her hand still extended in midair. I turned slightly and pointed the remote at the large blank cream-colored wall behind Bernice. I had positioned the projector under the buffet table when I arrived, hidden behind a long tablecloth. I pressed the power button. A beam of blue light cut through the dim room, hitting the wall and illuminating the shocked faces of the dinner guests. The beam of light stabilized against the cream wallpaper, transforming the formal dining room into a cold interrogation chamber. A collective gasp rippled through the room as the image sharpened into focus. It was not a slideshow of family memories. It was a spreadsheet. High resolution, meticulously organized, color-coded. I stepped away from the table and walked toward the projection, my shadow cutting across the numbers like a pointer. The room was deathly silent. The only sound was the low hum of the projector fan and the faint clinking of a fork dropping onto a china plate. "What you are looking at is a comprehensive 5-year history of my financial interactions with this family," I said, my voice calm and professional, as if I were presenting a patient chart at the hospital. On the left in red, you will see every transfer I have sent to Bernice since the day after Jamal's funeral. Every check. Every digital payment. Totaling exactly $24,000. I paused, allowing the number to sink in. I saw Aunt Sarah's eyes widen behind her glasses. She looked from the screen to Bernice and back again, doing the mental math. "I sent this money because I was told it was for the mortgage," I continued. "I was told that without my help, Bernice would be homeless. I was told I was paying off Jamal's gambling debts." Bernice shifted in her chair. She looked like she wanted to speak, to scream, to shut it off, but she was paralyzed by the sheer volume of data on the wall. The truth was too big to shout down. I pressed the button on the remote again. The spreadsheet highlighted a new column in bright neon green. "Now look at the column on the right. This is the transaction history of Bernice's account, which I obtained through a subpoena of records." That was a lie. I got it from Marcus at the bank, but they did not need to know that. The word subpoena terrified them. "Notice the pattern," I said, pointing to the dates. October 15th. Incoming transfer from Keisha. $400. October 16th. Outgoing transfer to K. Jenkins Day Trading Fund. $400. I turned my head slowly to look at Kyle. The arrogance that had defined his face for the last hour had completely vanished. His skin had taken on a sickly gray pallor. He was staring at his own name projected on the wall in 5-foot letters. A single bead of sweat broke free from his hairline and rolled down his temple, disappearing into the collar of his expensive shirt. He gripped his steak knife so hard his knuckles were white, but he could not look at me. November. I read aloud relentlessly. December, January, February. It is the same story every single month for 60 months. I starve myself to send money to Bernice. Bernice funnels it directly to Kyle, and Kyle gambles it away on penny stocks and cryptocurrency. Pastor Jenkins slowly took off his spectacles and placed them on the table. He looked at the screen, then at Bernice, then at Kyle. His mouth hung slightly open in genuine shock. He had preached sermons about charity and family duty in this very house. Now he was looking at the ledger of a con artist. "So, let us be clear," I said, turning back to the room. "I am not broke because I am bad with money. I am broke because I have been unknowingly funding Kyle's hobby of playing Wall Street with his dead brother's life insurance. Kyle cleared his throat, his voice cracking. Now wait a minute, Keisha. That is out of context. I was investing it for the family. Investing? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I clicked the remote one more time. A graph appeared showing a steep red line plummeting downward. According to this, you have lost 90% of the principal. You are not an investor, Kyle. You are a thief, and you have been stealing from a widow. But the silence that followed the spreadsheet was nothing compared to the sound that was about to fill the room. I watched Kyle squirm in his seat, wiping sweat from his forehead, but I was not done with him yet. And I was certainly not done with Bernice. She was staring at the wall, her mouth slightly open, trying to process the fact that her beloved son had gambled away her security. She looked at him with confusion, but not hate. Not yet. She still needed a reason to turn on him. I have one more clip to show you, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. You see, Bernice, you thought you and Kyle were partners in this scam. You thought you were the mastermind, and he was the dutiful son helping you survive. But there is no honor among thieves. I clicked the remote one last time. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by the high-definition video footage from the backyard. It was the same scene I had watched on my laptop, but projected on the dining room wall. The decadence was overwhelming. The steam from the jacuzzi rose into the air. The champagne bottles sparkled. In the video, Bernice had just walked away to get more appetizers, leaving Kyle and Tiana alone in the water. The camera zoomed in on Kyle's face. He looked relaxed, arrogant, and unguarded. On the screen, Tiana splashed water at him and laughed. Mama is really working hard on this party. She is so stressed about the money. The Kyle on the screen threw his head back and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the silent dining room. She is always stressed, he said, taking a swig of champagne. She is a drama queen. Honestly, I wish the old hag would just shut up and go to sleep. She is so loud. A collective gasp went through the room. Aunt Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. Pastor Jenkins looked down at his plate, unable to watch, but the video continued. She actually thinks she is in charge. Kyle's voice boomed from the speakers. She thinks she is running this operation. Stupid old woman does not even realize I have been skimming off her pension checks too. She is losing her mind, Tiana. As soon as we get the next big payout from Keisha, we should put her in a home. Somewhere cheap. I am tired of listening to her voice. I hit the pause button, freezing the image on Kyle's face right as he called his mother a stupid old woman. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Slowly, terrifyingly, Bernice turned her head. She did not look at me. She looked at the man sitting to her right, the son she had coddled, the son she had protected, the son she had helped rob me to support. Her face was a mask of betrayal. The veins in her neck were bulging. You called me what, she whispered. Her voice was shaking so hard it barely sounded human. Kyle held up his hands, his face pale as a sheet. Ma, listen. That is edited. That is AI. Keisha faked it. You know how technology is these days? You are skimming my pension, Bernice screamed. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a deafening crash. You are stealing from me, too. I sat back in my chair and took a sip of my wine. The taste was cheap, but the victory was sweet. I did not have to say another word. The pack of wolves had finally turned on each other. Kyle looked like a rat trapped in a corner. The projection on the wall was still frozen on his sneering face, but the real Kyle was vibrating with panic. He knocked over his wine glass as he stood up, and the dark red liquid stained the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a gunshot wound. He pointed a shaking finger at me and then at the wall, his eyes darting around the room looking for anyone who would believe him. That is not real, he stammered, his voice pitching high with desperation. That is a deepfake. You have all seen the news. You know what they can do with computers these days. Keisha used some cheap app to put words in my mouth. She is trying to frame me. Pastor Jenkins, you know me. You know I would never speak about my mother that way. He looked at the pastor pleadingly, but the older man just stared back, his face unreadable and cold. Kyle turned to Bernice, his hands out in a gesture of innocence. Ma, please, you cannot believe this manipulation. She has been planning this. She is jealous of our relationship. She fabricated the whole thing to tear us apart. Beside him, Tiana erupted. She slammed her hands onto the table, causing the silverware to rattle violently. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. She did not care about the evidence. She only cared that her perfect Thanksgiving tableau had been destroyed by the woman she considered beneath her. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice piercing the air like shattered glass. "Turn it off right now, you jealous witch! How dare you come into our home and pull a stunt like this? You are pathetic. You are just a lonely, bitter widow who cannot stand seeing us happy." Tiana marched around the table, her eyes wild. She looked like she wanted to physically attack me, but something in my calm demeanor kept her at bay. She settled for screaming instead. "Nobody believes your fake videos, Keisha. We know who you are. You are a leech. You are just trying to distract everyone from the fact that you are broke and miserable. Get out. Take your projector and your lies and get out of our lives." The room was in chaos. Aunt Sarah was whispering furiously to her husband. The cousins were looking at their phones, likely texting the rest of the family about the drama unfolding in real time. The illusion of the perfect family had not just cracked it, had shattered into a million pieces. But the loudest voice was yet to come. Bernice had been standing frozen, her chest heaving as she looked between the screen and her son. The humiliation was radiating off her in waves. She had been exposed as a fool in front of her pastor and her friends. She had been revealed as a mother whose son despised her. And worst of all, she had lost control. She turned slowly toward me. Her eyes were not filled with remorse for stealing my money. They were filled with hatred for me exposing the theft. In her twisted mind, I was the villain for turning on the light, not Kyle for hiding in the dark. She took a deep breath and let out a scream that shook the crystal chandelier above our heads. "Get out!" she bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the front door. "Get out of my house, Keisha. I do not care what lies you cooked up on that computer. You have disrespected me at my own table. You have insulted my son. You are poison." She grabbed the edge of the table, leaning over it with menacing intent. "I want you gone, now. Do not ever set foot on this property again. If you are not out in 10 seconds, I am calling the police and having you dragged out for trespassing. This is my house, and I say you are done." I sat there calmly amidst the storm of their rage. I watched them scream and deny and threaten. I waited until Bernice finished her tirade, until the echo of her voice died down in the room. Then I reached into my bag one last time. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Bernice," I said quietly, "because this is not your house." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my red dress. The room was spinning with the energy of their hatred, but I felt grounded like a tree with roots deep in the earth. I felt the cold, hard weight of the blue legal folder in my hand. Bernice was still pointing at the door, her face twisted in a rictus of rage, waiting for me to flee, like the scared little girl she thought I was. I did not flee. I walked around the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor until I stood directly in front of her. I raised the folder high enough for everyone to see, and then I brought it down. The sound of the heavy folder hitting the polished mahogany table was louder than a gunshot. It rattled the silverware and sent a wine glass tipping over, spilling more red liquid onto the white cloth like a fresh wound. The sudden violence of the action silenced Bernice instantly. Her mouth snapped shut, and she flinched, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. "You seem to be confused about the ownership of this property, Bernice," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You keep calling this your house. You have been telling everyone for 5 years that the bank was threatening to take it. You made me bleed to keep a roof over your head. You told me the wolves were at the door." I flipped the folder open. The pages inside were crisp and white. I pulled out the deed, the one I had printed from the county records. I held it up for Pastor Jenkins to see. I held it up for Kyle to see. "Read it," I commanded, pointing to the bold text at the top. Kyle squinted at the paper, his face pale. He did not want to read it. He knew exactly what legal documents looked like, and he knew that this one spelled his doom. "If you cannot read, I will read it for you," I said, turning back to Bernice. "This is a release of mortgage dated 1 month before Jamal died. He paid it off, Bernice. Every single cent. There is no mortgage. There never was. Every dollar you took from me for the last 5 years, claiming it was for the bank, was fraud. You stole $24,000 from a widow to pay for landscaping and champagne." Bernice stumbled back, clutching her chest, her eyes wide with panic. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That is a lie. Jamal would never." "It is a public record," I snapped, cutting her off. "And here's the best part." I pulled out the second document, the trust agreement. I slammed my finger onto the line that mattered most. "Look at the owner listed on the deed. It does not say Bernice Williams. It does not say Kyle Jenkins. It says the Jamal Williams Revocable Trust. And do you know who the sole beneficiary and trustee of that trust is?" I looked her dead in the eye, leaning in close so she could see the fire burning in my own. "It is me, Bernice. It is Keisha Williams." I tossed the papers onto the table right on top of her dinner plate, covering the turkey she was so proud of. "Jamal left this house to me. He let you stay here because he loved you, and he thought you would respect his memory. But the trust has conditions, and by stealing from the trustee, you have broken every single one of them. So let me be crystal clear. You are not the owner of this estate. You are a tenant, and I am your landlord. And as of this moment, your lease is officially terminated." Bernice stared at the papers on the table, her hands shaking too much to pick them up. She looked at me with wild, desperate eyes, trying to find a lie that would make this nightmare go away. "You are lying," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "You typed these up yourself. Jamal would never put conditions on his own mother. He gave me this house. He told me it was mine. You are just trying to confuse me with legal mumbo-jumbo." I did not have to answer her. A deep baritone voice spoke from the hallway behind me, cutting through her panic like a knife. "Mrs. Williams, I assure you the documents are quite authentic. I should know. I wrote them myself." Bernice gasped and looked past me. Mr. Henderson stepped into the light of the dining room. I had left the front door unlocked for him, and he had entered quietly, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. He was wearing his charcoal gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked out of place among the gravy boats and wine glasses. He looked like Judgment Day. "Mr. Henderson," Bernice whispered, recognizing Jamal's old attorney. "What are you doing here? This is a private family dinner." Mr. Henderson walked into the room and stood next to me. He did not smile. He placed his briefcase on a side chair and clicked it open. "I am here as legal counsel for the trustee, Mrs. Keisha Williams, and I am here to clarify the terms of your living arrangement, since there seems to be some confusion." He pulled out a pristine copy of the trust and held it up. "You see, Bernice, when Jamal created this revocable trust, he was very specific. He wanted you to have a place to live, but he was also realistic about your history with money. That is why he included Article 7, Clause C, regarding the right of occupancy." He walked around the table, slowly, making sure everyone could hear him. "The clause states that the beneficiary, Bernice Williams, may reside in the property for the duration of her life, strictly provided she remains in good standing with the trustee and maintains the property without committing waste or fraud." He stopped in front of Kyle, who was trying to make himself invisible in his chair. "Fraud," Mr. Henderson repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That includes soliciting funds from the trustee under false pretenses. By lying to Keisha about a non-existent mortgage and using that money for personal enrichment, you have violated the primary condition of the trust." Kyle jumped up, desperate to find a loophole. "Wait a minute," he shouted, pointing a finger at the lawyer. "You cannot prove where that money went. That is just a spreadsheet. We will fight this in court. We will sue for elder abuse. Mr. Henderson laughed a dry, humorless sound. Please do try, Mr. Jenkins. We have subpoenaed the bank records. We have the video of you admitting to the scheme. We have the text messages. In a civil court, the burden of proof is preponderance of the evidence. And frankly, we have enough evidence here to not only evict you, but to have you both indicted for grand larceny. Bernice collapsed back into her chair, her face ashen. The word indictment hit her harder than the eviction. She looked at the lawyer, then at me, realizing the trap had snapped shut. So what does this mean? She whispered, her voice barely audible. It means the free ride is over, Mr. Henderson said, closing his folder with a finality that echoed in the silent room. You are no longer a guest here, Bernice. You are a liability, and the trustee has decided to cut her losses. I stepped forward, stepping in front of Mr. Henderson to deliver the final strike myself. The lawyer had done his part by laying out the complex terms of the trust, but I wanted to make this personal. I wanted Bernice to understand that her downfall was not just a result of legal clauses but of her own arrogance. I pressed the button on the remote one last time. The spreadsheet of fraud vanished. In its place appeared a high-resolution scan of the very last check I had written to Bernice just 30 days ago. It was blown up to the size of a movie poster. The details were crisp. The date, the amount, her signature on the back endorsing the funds. But I pointed the laser dot at the bottom left corner. The memo line. Do you see this, Bernice? I asked, my voice echoing in the silent dining room. Do you see what I wrote on every single check for 60 months? Bernice squinted, her eyes wet with tears of frustration. It says rent, she spat. So what? You always wrote that. We used to laugh about it. We thought you were just being a petty little accountant. I smiled, cold and sharp. You laughed. But while you were laughing, you were signing a contract. I turned to the room, addressing the stunned guests. In the state of Illinois, when a property owner accepts regular payments marked clearly as rent from an occupant, it establishes a specific legal relationship. It does not matter that we are family. It does not matter that there was no written lease. By cashing these checks, Bernice, you acknowledge that I am the landlord and you are the tenant. Kyle jumped up, knocking his chair over. That is nonsense. You cannot pull a landlord-tenant scam on your own mother. This is a family home. It is not a family home, Kyle. I countered, my voice rising over his. It is an asset. And according to the law, since there is no lease specifying a timeline, you are what is known as a tenant at will. That means the arrangement is month to month. I walked over to the table and leaned down until my face was level with Bernice's. She smelled of fear and expensive perfume, a combination that was starting to make me sick. You thought I was weak for paying you. You thought I was stupid for documenting it, but I was just building a paper trail. I was establishing a history of tenancy so that when this moment came you would have no defense. You accepted my authority every time you took my money to the bank. I straightened up and looked at Mr. Henderson. He gave me a subtle nod, confirming I was on solid ground. So here is the situation, Bernice. I am the owner of this house. You are a tenant who has not only damaged the property by smashing my husband's belongings, but has also engaged in criminal fraud against the landlord. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single white envelope. I did not throw it. I placed it gently on the table next to the cranberry sauce. This is your official 30-day notice to quit. But given the hostile environment and the threats you made earlier about calling the police on me, I am exercising my right to terminate this tenancy immediately for cause. Bernice stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. She looked up at me, her lip quivering. You cannot do this, she whispered. Where am I supposed to go? I looked at her with zero sympathy. The same place you told me to go when I lost my job. You have 2 hands and a strong back, Bernice. Figure it out. The silence that hung over the dining table was shattered by a sharp, authoritative banging on the front door. It was not the polite ring of a guest. It was the heavy, insistent knock of law enforcement. Bernice's face lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her napkin like a lifeline. Thank God, she cried out, looking triumphantly at me. I told you I would call them Keisha. I told you I would not let you harass me in my own home. Officer, come in. This woman is trespassing. She ran to the foyer and threw the door open. Two uniformed police officers stood on the porch, their faces grim, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights of the cruiser parked behind Keisha's battered sedan. The cold air rushed in again, chilling the room, but Bernice did not seem to feel it. Officer, you have to help me. Bernice panted, pointing a shaking finger back at the dining room. That woman is my daughter-in-law. She is unstable. She broke in. Here she is making threats and she refuses to leave. I want her arrested immediately. The older officer, Officer Miller, stepped into the hallway. He looked past Bernice, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me, standing calmly in my red dress. He then looked at Mr. Henderson, who gave him a brief professional nod. Are you Keisha Williams? Officer Miller asked, ignoring Bernice completely. Yes, I am, I replied, stepping forward. And are you the legal owner of this property as stated in the deed provided to our station this afternoon? Yes, officer, and this is my attorney, Mr. Henderson. Bernice stopped dead in her tracks. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked from the officer to me, realization slowly dawning on her face like a cold sunrise. Wait! What? Bernice stammered. Why are you asking her? I am the one who lives here. Officer Miller turned to Bernice, his expression hardening. Ma'am, we are not here to arrest Ms. Williams. We are here to enforce an emergency order of protection and an immediate notice to quit, based on credible reports of domestic violence and property destruction. Domestic violence, Bernice shrieked. That is absurd. I have never hurt a fly. Mr. Henderson stepped in, his voice smooth and lethal. Officer, if you look at the evidence provided, specifically the destruction of the deceased husband's framed photograph, which was hurled across the room in a fit of rage, you will see a pattern of violent intimidation. My client, Ms. Williams, fears for her safety and the safety of the property assets. Kyle pushed his way to the front, trying to use his height to intimidate the officer. This is a misunderstanding, Kyle blustered. My mother just dropped a picture frame. It was an accident. You cannot kick us out of our own house on Thanksgiving because of a broken picture. Officer Miller put a hand on his belt near his taser. Step back, sir. We have seen the video footage of the threats made against the owner. We have the statement regarding the intentional destruction of property. In the state of Illinois, when a tenant poses a physical threat to the landlord or the property, immediate eviction is enforceable to prevent further escalation. He pulled a folded paper from his vest and handed it to Bernice. This is a vacate order. You have lost your privilege to occupy the premises, effective immediately. Bernice stared at the paper, trembling. But we have guests. We have a turkey on the table. We haven't even had dessert. I walked up to her, standing shoulder to shoulder with the officer. You should have thought about that before you threw Jamal's memory in the trash, I said softly. Officer Miller checked his watch. You do not have time for dessert, folks. You have exactly 30 minutes to gather your essential personal items, medication, clothes, and toiletries only. Anything else stays here until civil matters are settled. 30 minutes, Tiana screamed from the dining room, dropping her wine glass. I cannot pack my life in 30 minutes. Then I suggest you start moving, Officer Miller barked. If you are not off this property by 8:30 p.m., you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Clock starts now. The ticking clock turned the elegant house into a scene from a disaster movie. The veneer of high society crumbled instantly, leaving only panic and raw, ugly self-preservation. Bernice threw herself at my feet, grabbing the hem of my red dress with desperate claw-like hands. The tears streaming down her face ruined her expensive makeup, turning her into a grotesque mask of sorrow. Keisha, baby, please listen to me, she wailed, pulling at my skirt. I did not know. I swear on Jamal's grave, I did not know it was fraud. It was Kyle. He told me it was okay. He told me the trust was just a suggestion. He manipulated me, Keisha. I am just a confused old woman. You cannot throw your mother-in-law out on the street. I have high blood pressure. I could die out there." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. The woman who had sneered at my poverty 5 minutes ago was now trying to wash my feet with her tears. I stepped back, pulling my dress from her grip. "Get up, Bernice," I said, my voice ice cold. "You were not confused when you spent my rent money on trips to Cabo. You were not confused when you threw Jamal's picture at my head. Save the performance for the judge." Across the room, Tiana was sprinting down the stairs, struggling under the weight of an armful of designer handbags and jewelry boxes. She looked like a looter in a riot. She made a break for the front door, her eyes wild. "I am not leaving my Louis Vuitton," she screamed at her husband, who was paralyzed with fear. "I earned these." Officer Miller stepped in front of her, blocking the exit with his massive frame. "Put them down, ma'am," the officer ordered. "Excuse me," Tiana shrieked, clutching a bag to her chest. "These are my personal property. You said we could take essentials." "Essentials mean clothes and medicine, not luxury assets purchased with disputed funds," the officer replied calmly. "We have reason to believe these items were purchased with money embezzled from the Williams Trust. They are considered evidence. Put them on the floor, now." Tiana looked at the officer, then at me, then at the bag. She screamed a sound of pure frustration and threw the expensive leather onto the floor. It landed with a dull thud. "You will pay for this, Keisha," she spat at me. "I will sue you for every penny." While Tiana was throwing her tantrum, Kyle tried to use the confusion to slip out the side door toward the garage. He had his car keys in his hand, his eyes fixed on escape. "Not so fast, Mr. Jenkins." Officer Miller's partner, a younger officer who had been standing by the kitchen, stepped forward and grabbed Kyle's arm. He spun him around and slammed him against the wall. "Hey, get off me!" Kyle yelled, struggling. "I am leaving. You said we had to leave." "You are being evicted from the property." "Yes," the officer said, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "But you are not going to a hotel. You are coming with us." The sound of the cuffs ratcheting shut silenced the room. Click, click. Bernice stopped crying and stared. Tiana gasped, covering her mouth. "What is this?" Kyle stammered, his face pressing against the wallpaper. "I did not hit anyone." "You cannot arrest me for a civil dispute. We are not arresting you for the eviction," Officer Miller said, walking over. "We are arresting you on a warrant issued this afternoon by the IRS. Tax fraud," Kyle asked, his voice barely a squeak. "Your sister-in-law provided us with your trading records and bank statements," the officer explained. "It seems you have moved over $20,000 of unreported income through various accounts without declaring a cent. Tax evasion is a felony, Mr. Jenkins. And since you were trying to flee the scene, we are taking you in now." Bernice let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. "My son. My baby. Not jail. Anything but jail." I watched as they dragged Kyle toward the door. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with terror. He finally realized that I hadn't just come for the house. I had come for his freedom. "Happy Thanksgiving, Kyle," I whispered. "Don't drop the soap." The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers painted the foyer walls in a rhythmic, disorienting strobe. I stood on the threshold, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the final act of the tragedy play out. It was a pathetic parade. Officer Miller marched Kyle down the front walk, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head hung low to hide his face from the neighbors who had gathered on their lawns. The arrogance that had defined him for years had evaporated, leaving behind only a scared man facing a felony charge. Tiana followed, shivering in the biting November wind. She had no coat, only her thin party dress, and a small plastic bag containing her toothbrush and face cream. She did not look back at the house. She stared at the ground, furiously typing on her phone, likely trying to spin a story on social media that would make her the victim before the mugshots were released. Then came Bernice. She paused at the bottom of the concrete steps. She looked incredibly small. The imperious matriarch who had ruled this house like a dictator was gone. In her place was a frail, elderly woman in a stained gold dress clutching a bottle of blood pressure medication like a lifeline. She turned slowly to look at me one last time. Her eyes searched mine, desperate for a flicker of pity. She was waiting for me to crack. She was waiting for the guilt to set in. She wanted the old Keisha to run down the stairs and apologize. I looked back at her and felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a hollow indifference. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply stood there, the lady of the manor, watching a trespasser be removed. The officer gently nudged her toward the waiting car, and she finally broke eye contact, slumping her shoulders in total defeat. I watched them climb into the back of the vehicles. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing them away in a reality they had created for themselves. I did not wait for the cars to drive away. I did not need to watch them disappear to know they were gone. I stepped back inside and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. I pushed it shut with a definitive motion. The slam was loud. It echoed through the high ceilings, shaking the crystal chandelier one last time. Then came the click of the deadbolt, a sharp metallic sound that signaled the end of the war. I leaned my back against the solid wood and closed my eyes, waiting for the silence to hit me. I expected it to feel lonely. I expected the house to feel too big, too empty, and too haunted by the memories of their cruelty. But as the sound of the sirens faded into the distance, the silence that settled over the room was not cold. It was warm. It was heavy and protective like a weighted blanket. It was the silence of peace. I opened my eyes and looked down the hallway toward the dining room. The projector was still humming, casting a blue square of light on the wall, where the evidence of their crimes had been exposed. The turkey sat on the table cooling and untouched. The wine stain on the tablecloth was drying, a permanent reminder of the night the truth spilled out. It was a mess. There were dishes to clear and stains to scrub and bad energy to sage out of the corners. But for the first time in 5 years, it was my mess. I walked into the dining room and unplugged the projector, killing the harsh light and returning the room to a soft amber glow. I walked to the head of the table where Bernice had sat for so long, presiding over her kingdom of lies. I pulled out the heavy, high-backed chair. I sat down, placing my hands on the smooth wood of the table. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of vanilla and roasted meat, finally free of the stench of fear. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was finally home. The week that followed the eviction was not quiet. It was the loudest week of my life, but it was a different kind of noise. It was the sound of zippers and packing tape. It was the heavy thud of work boots on hardwood and the screech of furniture being dragged across the floor. I did not spend my time wandering the halls like a ghost. I spent it holding a clipboard and directing a crew of 4 burly movers I had hired to perform an exorcism on the property. I stood in the center of the living room, watching 2 men hoist the cream-colored leather sectional onto their shoulders. The same sofa where Bernice had sat like a queen and told me I was worthless was now being manhandled through the front door. Careful with the door frame, I instructed without looking up from my inventory list. But do not worry about the couch. It is going to the auction house. Get it out of here. I had made a decision the morning after they left. I could not live here. This house was beautiful on paper. It had granite countertops and crown molding and a jacuzzi in the back. But the walls had absorbed 5 years of lies. The air was stale with the memory of their cruelty. I did not want to scrub the floors. I wanted to sell the floorboards. I wanted to liquidate the trauma and turn it into cold, hard cash. A real estate agent named Brenda walked in, her heels clicking on the floor. She looked around the spacious room, her eyes lighting up at the square footage. "It is a stunning property," Ms. Williams, Brenda said, running her hand along the mantel. "The market is hot right now. But are you sure you want to sell so quickly? With a little staging, you could live here very comfortably. It is a dream home." I looked at the spot where the picture frame had shattered. I looked at the dining room where the police had handcuffed Kyle. "It is not a dream home, Brenda," I said, my voice flat. It is a crime scene. I do not want to stage it. I want to purge it. I want to sell it as is fast and for the highest possible price. I want the check in my hand before Christmas. Brenda nodded, understanding the tone of a woman who was done negotiating. We can list it tomorrow. I have investors looking for properties in this zip code. We will spark a bidding war. Good, I said. Sell it to a nice family, someone who will fill it with love instead of greed. Just get it off my hands. I walked into the kitchen where a second crew was packing up the contents of the cabinets. I watched them wrap the expensive china in bubble wrap. I saw the crystal wine glasses disappear into cardboard boxes. I did not keep a single thing. Not the plates they ate off of, not the silverware they used to cut the turkey I paid for. I ordered everything to be sold at an estate sale. The proceeds would go into a new account. My account. The only thing I kept was a small cardboard box sitting on the kitchen island. Inside were Jamal's old baseball glove, his college diploma, and the few photos of him that Bernice hadn't managed to ruin. That was the only inheritance I needed. The rest of this, the furniture, the electronics, the clothes Tiana left behind, was just debris. By Friday afternoon, the house was empty. The movers had swept the floors, leaving nothing but dust motes dancing in the sunlight. I walked through the rooms one last time. The echo of my footsteps was the only sound. The house felt lighter, as if it were relieved to be empty of the parasites that had infested it. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I walked down the driveway to where Brenda was hammering a for sale sign into the lawn. The red and white sign looked like a flag of victory. I got into my car and started the engine. I did not look back at the house with longing. I looked at it as a bank account, a resource. I was driving away from a prison and toward a future that was entirely fully mine. The last room to be cleared was the small study at the back of the house. It was a room Bernice never entered because it didn't have a TV or a wet bar. The movers had stripped the bookshelves, leaving only dust and shadows. But as I did a final sweep to make sure nothing important was left behind, my eye caught something tucked deep in the corner of the highest shelf. It was Jamal's old leather Bible. The cover was worn and cracked from use, the gold lettering faded with age. I reached up and pulled it down, blowing off a thick layer of gray dust. The irony was bitter. Bernice had spent the last 5 years quoting scripture to manipulate me and justify her greed, yet she had left the actual word of God behind like garbage when she fled. I held the book in my hands, feeling the weight of it. It smelled like old paper and the cedar cologne Jamal used to wear. I opened the front cover, intending to just check for a bookmark. Instead, a thick cream-colored envelope slid out from between the pages and fluttered to the hardwood floor. I froze. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was messy and rushed the scrawl of a man whose mind moved faster than his pen. To my wife, it said. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat down right there on the dusty floor, crossing my legs in the empty room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely slide my finger under the flap to tear it open. The letter inside was dated 2 weeks before he died. Keisha baby, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And if you found this, it means you are finally looking through my things, which I know took you a long time because you have such a soft heart. I wiped a tear from my cheek and continued reading. I need to tell you something I was too chicken shit to say to your face. I love my mother and I love Kyle because they are my blood. But I know who they are. They are sharks, Keisha. They see people as food. I have spent my whole life trying to keep them fed so they would not eat me alive. But I am terrified that when I am gone, they will turn their teeth on you. A sob escaped my throat, echoing in the hollow room. He knew. He had always known. That is why I set up the trust the way I did. Jamal wrote, that is why I paid off the mortgage in secret. I wanted to give you a weapon. I hope you never have to use it. I hope they treat you like the queen you are. But if they don't, if they try to bully you or bleed you dry, I want you to know that you have the power. The house is yours. The money is yours. Do not let them guilt you into poverty. You are the strongest woman I know, but your kindness is your only weakness. Do not let them use it against you. Protect yourself, Keisha. I love you more than life. I pressed the letter to my chest, rocking back and forth as the tears finally came. They were not the hot, angry tears of the last week. They were cleansing tears. Zing. For 5 years, I had carried the guilt of evicting his family. I had wondered if I was betraying his memory by being so ruthless. But I wasn't betraying him. I was obeying him. He hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a shield. He had seen the war coming before I even knew I was on the battlefield, and he had armed me. I kissed the paper, tasting the salt of my tears. I heard you, Jamal, I whispered into the silence. I used the weapon. I won. I stood up and tucked the letter carefully into my purse along with the Bible. I wiped my face and looked around the empty study one last time. It didn't feel sad anymore. It felt complete. I walked out of the room and down the hall, my footsteps light and sure, ready to close this door forever. The winter frost had melted away completely, replaced by the warm golden light of early June. I stood on the makeshift wooden stage in front of a renovated brick building on the south side. The air did not smell of expensive potpourri or stale deceit. It smelled of fresh paint, wet asphalt, and the blooming hydrangeas I had insisted on planting along the walkway. Above the double glass doors, a shiny new silver sign caught the sunlight. It read, "The Jamal Williams Community Health Center." I smoothed the lapels of my tailored white suit. It was a sharp contrast to the red revenge dress I had worn that night at Thanksgiving. That dress was a weapon designed to draw blood. This suit was a statement designed to build a future. I looked out at the crowd gathering on the sidewalk. There were no social climbers or judgmental relatives here. There were mothers holding babies, elderly men in wheelchairs, and neighborhood kids running around with blue balloons. Mrs. Johnson was sitting in the front row wearing a hat so large and magnificent it defied gravity. She caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up, her smile stretching from ear to ear. She was my first board member. She was the one who told me that the best revenge is not just destroying your enemies but thriving in spite of them. I stepped up to the microphone. The feedback squealed for a second before settling into a hum. I looked at the oversized red ribbon stretched across the entrance. It was the only barrier left in my life. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice projecting clear and strong, without a hint of the tremor that used to plague me. 6 months ago, I was lost. I was pouring my energy and my resources into a black hole. I thought I was honoring my husband by supporting people who did not respect him, but I learned a hard lesson. You honor the dead by helping the living. I paused, looking at the sign again. I sold the house on Maple Avenue. It went for $50,000 over the asking price. I could have bought a penthouse. I could have gone on a vacation. But I took every cent of the equity, every dollar I recovered from the fraud investigation, and I put it into this concrete and glass. This clinic belongs to you. It belongs to the single mothers working 2 shifts. It belongs to the families who have to choose between rent and medicine. The crowd erupted in applause. It was a genuine sound. It wasn't the polite golf clap of Bernice's dinner parties. It was the sound of gratitude. I picked up the giant ceremonial scissors. The metal was cool and heavy in my hands. I felt a familiar warmth on my shoulder, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was Jamal. He wasn't in the dusty Bible anymore. He was standing right next to me, laughing that deep belly laugh, proud that his name was finally being used for good. "I am not a victim anymore," I continued, my voice rising over the cheers. "I am a survivor, and today I am a builder." I opened the scissors and clamped them down on the red satin. "For Jamal," I whispered. Snip. The ribbon fell away, fluttering to the ground in 2 perfect pieces. The crowd cheered louder. Mrs. Johnson waved a handkerchief and the doors to the clinic swung open. I walked down the steps not as a widow and not as a landlord. I walked into the sunlight as Keisha Williams, the woman who turned a tragedy into a sanctuary. My life was finally my own and it was beautiful. I never went back to Maple Avenue and I never searched for their names online. I did not need to. In a community as tight-knit as ours, the truth travels faster than light, and usually it traveled straight to Mrs. Johnson's front porch. She came into my office at the clinic one rainy Tuesday afternoon, shaking her umbrella and wearing a look of grim satisfaction. She sat down in the chair opposite my desk and laid it all out. It started with Kyle. The self-proclaimed financial genius was currently residing in a medium-security federal facility downstate. It turned out the IRS does not appreciate people who move 5 figures of unreported income through shell accounts. He took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, but he was still looking at 3 years for tax evasion and fraud. The man who used to mock my cheap shoes was now wearing state-issued shower slides. Mrs. Johnson heard from a cousin who works as a guard that Kyle was assigned to the prison laundry detail. He was washing other men's dirty sheets for 12 cents an hour. He was finally learning the value of hard labor. Then there was Tiana. The princess who used to scream if her latte foam was not perfect had suffered a harsh fall from grace. When the feds seized Kyle's assets, they took everything, including the leased SUV and the designer bags she had tried to loot from the house. She was spotted by Deacon Miller at a greasy spoon diner on the edge of town. She was not a customer. She was wearing a stained apron and sensible shoes, taking orders from truck drivers. Apparently, she had moved into a studio apartment above a garage. She was living the exact life she used to mock me for. She was scrubbing tables and counting dimes just to keep the lights on. But the fate of Bernice was the one that silenced the room. After the eviction, she had tried to bounce between relatives. She went to Aunt Sarah's house first, but that lasted less than a week. Once the story of the Thanksgiving dinner spread through the church grapevine, nobody wanted to harbor the woman who had desecrated her dead son's memory. The social exile was absolute. The church ladies who used to fight to sit next to her in the pews now crossed the street when they saw her coming. She ended up in a state-subsidized housing complex on the far east side, a place known for broken elevators and thin walls. Mrs. Johnson saw her at the grocery store recently. She said Bernice looked small. She was pushing a wire cart with a wobbly wheel, arguing with the cashier about a 50-cent coupon. She was wearing the same coat she wore the night she was evicted, and it was missing a button. She was alone. Her phone did not ring. Her son was in a cage. Her daughter-in-law was scrubbing floors, and she was left with nothing but the echo of her own bitterness. I listened to all of it and waited for a surge of joy or a laugh, but it did not come. I just felt a quiet release. I did not hate them anymore. I did not pity them either. They were just people who had made a series of terrible choices and were finally paying the bill. Justice had been served not by my hand, but by the inevitable gravity of their own actions. I thanked Mrs. Johnson for the update, and then I went back to work. I had patients to see. I had a life to build. And I did not have a single second left to waste on the past. I sit back in my chair and look around this living room. It is not the mansion on Maple Avenue. It is smaller. It is simpler. But it is filled with something that house never had. It is filled with peace. I put down my teacup and look directly at you, because if you take anything away from my story, I want it to be this. For a long time, I thought that love meant sacrifice. I thought that being a good wife and a good daughter-in-law meant setting myself on fire just to keep other people warm. I let them drain me dry because I was afraid that if I said no, I would be alone. I was afraid of being the villain in their story. But here is the truth. You are not a villain for protecting your peace. You are not selfish for demanding respect. And you are certainly not wrong for closing your wallet when the people reaching into it do not care if you starve. Bernice and Kyle and Tiana taught me a painful lesson, but it was a necessary one. They taught me that there is a difference between generosity and foolishness. People often ask me if I feel bad about what happened to them. They ask if I ever think about visiting Kyle in prison or sending Bernice a food basket. The answer is no. I do not wish them harm, but I do not owe them my energy. That is the beauty of indifference. I stopped carrying their baggage the moment I walked out that door. Real revenge is not about screaming matches or slashing tires. It is not about making them suffer the way they made you suffer. That is messy, and it keeps you tied to them. The sweetest revenge is simply taking back what is yours. It is reclaiming your dignity. It is reclaiming your assets. It is reclaiming your joy. The best revenge is becoming so successful and so happy that their existence no longer registers on your radar. I look at the photo of Jamal on the mantel. He is smiling. I know he is proud, not because I fought back, but because I finally stood up. I honored his legacy by refusing to let it be squandered by greed. So if you are out there listening to this and you feel like you are drowning to keep someone else afloat, I want you to cut the anchor. Stop apologizing for your boundaries. Stop funding people who only love you when you are paying the bill. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be respected. And you deserve to live a life that belongs entirely to you. I smile one last time, a genuine smile that reaches my eyes. I am Keisha Williams. I am a survivor. And I am finally free. Fade to black. Keisha's journey proves that silence is not weakness, it is often a strategy. The most profound lesson here is that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you. True power lies in knowing your worth, documenting the truth, and having the courage to walk away from toxicity even when it shares your last name. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about reclaiming your resources and your peace. The best revenge is not cruelty, but living a thriving, independent life where your abusers no longer have access to you. If you've ever had to cut off a toxic person to save yourself, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice.